So, Tony, you tested anything fun recently besides the Taycan versus Tesla race?
I drove a Turbo S at the end of March. That was, I think, the last press car that I've had.
Aren't you sheltering at home, Tony?
I am sheltering at home.
All right, just making sure.
And we usually test at the Hyundai Proving Ground, so we weren't able to test out there because of the shelter at home order. But I think in Michigan they're starting to open up the Chelsea Proving Ground, so we'll get the Car and Driver will be testing again very soon.
Good deal. Well, Katie, I think we're ready to go live here with it. This is Autoline After Hours with John McElroy and Gary Vasilash, episode 510 for May 21st of 2020, Autonomy, Technology, and Elon. Watch Autoline After Hours live at Autoline.tv every Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 12 p.m. Pacific. You can subscribe to this podcast for free by searching for Autoline in iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires. Your journey, our passion.
Well, hello, Gary Vasilash. How you doing today?
Good, John. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. And
so, with the exception of the bizarre buzzing that's coming from me.
Yeah, there is a bit of a buzz there. Technical difficulties, but we'll power our way through it.
Indeed, we will.
Yeah.
So you know, I know that 1981 was a good year for you. I don't know why, but I just think it was a good year for you. On this day in 1981, one of what I'm sure is one of your favorite cars came out. The Cadillac Cimarron. Remember that?
Oh, the Cimarron. Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
What an embarrassment of a car. You know, Cadillac really didn't even want to do the car. This was during the oil crisis, the second oil crisis. Mm-hmm. They were getting killed with sales. The dealers were, and they begged Cadillac to come out with something. So that was a rush job. What was it was the Chevy Cavalier was the Chevy
exactly.
version. It was just a Chevy Cavalier with some gussied up trim on it. It was a low point for the Cadillac brand.
There's Buick Skylark, Oldsmobile Forenza. Those were cars, my friend. Those were cars.
Yeah, not going to say what kind of cars, but
yeah.
Hey, we got to let everybody.
I'm sure our colleagues will have something to say about these cars, perhaps.
Well, let's start bringing them in. We got to let everybody know we got Tony Quiroga from Car and Driver. Hello there, Tony.
Hey, John. Hey, Gary. Thanks for having me.
Big Cimarron fan?
Yeah.
Love it.
Coming in from the West Coast, loud and clear.
Yes, sir.
Good to have you here. And we got to let everyone know we got Ed Niedermeyer with us today. Come on in, Ed.
Hey, John, Gary, Tony. Thanks for having me.
Coming in from Portland, Oregon.
Yeah, doing well.
So we got all kinds of things to talk about. Man, there's no shortage of stuff to talk about in this industry right now, even though, you know, it's only sort of, at least in the U.S., just sort of getting back on its feet, sort of.
But we got to talk about this study that Ed's organization, PAVE, just announced the results of. So fill us in on what PAVE is and fill us in on some of the things that you guys discovered about autonomous driving and people's perceptions.
Yeah, so PAVE is Partners for Automated Vehicle Education, and we are a nonprofit group that is backed by sort of a wide variety of companies in the automated driving space, so ADAS, as well as the level 4 autonomy companies, and a number of nonprofits as well, representing the disabled community and a bunch of other stakeholders in this technology. And we thought it would be important and interesting to get a sense of where sort of the public's perceptions of autonomous vehicles and automated driving more broadly are. And so we did a poll. It was sort of at an interesting time. It was in late February, early March. So sort of kind of just at the cusp of COVID, and sort of one of the caveats I think people should probably have when they look at this is that, obviously our world has changed. We've become used to, seeing people's kids in their background and their dogs and things like that. Life's changed a lot of ways, and one of them is that autonomous vehicle companies are out there trying to pitch in, which is really relevant to some of the themes in the data. And so I just want to say, like, this is, a little bit old. It's actually an eternity old if you go by how I feel about the last month or two. But with that aside, the top line, which is really what has been sort of most covered in the media, for better or for worse, is just that people are not super, enthusiastic about autonomous vehicles right now. 20% of Americans think that AVs will never be safe. Only 34% of Americans think the advantages of AVs outweigh the potential disadvantages. Nearly 3 in 4 say that autonomous vehicle technology is not ready for prime time. And of course, like a lot of these questions, how you define prime time, maybe they're right about that one. So on the one hand, there is this very, this sense, and again, this is consistent with like a number of polls over the last, I would say, 2 years, that have sort of reflected this kind of more pessimistic or skeptical take on AVs in the public. What was interesting about this, and I just started at PAVE at the beginning of this month, and the first thing I did was realize we had to get this poll out there, and so I dove into this data and spent a lot of time, 1,500 pages of crosstabs and comparisons, and I feel like I only scratched the surface, even though I spent days on this. But what's really fascinating about it is really the stuff about sort of where this problem is coming from. And so, for one example, if you look at the Uber crash in Tempe, Arizona, it was the first time an autonomous test vehicle was in a collision, and it was actually a fatal collision. A pedestrian died in that crash. Terrible tragedy. And one of the reasonable assumptions would be that would be something that contributed to the sort of negative perceptions of AVs. Turns out not that much, not so much. 51% of Americans say they know nothing at all about that particular crash. 37% say they know a little. And very few know anything at all. And actually what's interesting is that the people who do know about, or say that they know quite a bit about, which is a very small percentage about that crash, are actually a little bit more favorable on AVs, which suggests that they're just the small group of people that are actually paying attention to AVs. So really, like, just to kind of boil it down, what we really found is that yes, the perceptions are pretty negative. They're not where people in the business certainly want to see them. But the fundamental problem is not that people understand what's going on with AVs and don't like it. It's that they have no idea. And we asked people to rate their knowledge of AVs, and it was consistently low. People say they really don't know much about it. But there was 60% roughly, 60% did say they would have greater trust in AVs if they understood how the technology works, which of course for us as an educational group is really exciting. And then 59% said that they would trust AVs more if they had a chance to ride them. So I think the real lesson for us at PAVE seems to be that, perceptions are not great right now, but it's really just that people don't know hardly anything about these vehicles, this technology, how it works. There's a lot of confusion about it. And that, as people get more exposed, and this reflects, by the way, we've done events where we get people in AVs for the first time, and you see this anecdotally, what's reflected in the data, that people will go in with all kinds of concerns and fears. They'll take that ride and they'll be like, oh yeah, it's just getting a ride.
So isn't it much ado about nothing? I mean, basically you get in the car, it drives. I mean,
yeah, but again, I think, when people don't have really much to get traction on to build their sort of mental model of what an autonomous vehicle is, we fill those gaps in with whatever we can. And I think that in a lot of cases, it's like pop culture. And like autonomous vehicles, I don't know if you've seen the Amazon Prime has a show now about called Upload, which is a sci-fi show. And it features an autonomous vehicle crash very prominently in the plot line. And like AVs are generally portrayed pretty negatively in dystopian scenarios and heroes getting stuck in them and crashes happening and hackers, all this stuff. And I think what's happening is that people are just sort of populating their mental model with all this sci-fi stuff, which frankly, if you talk to the engineers about it, it has nothing to do, like most of those scenarios would be impossible in a real AV.
Yeah, Ed, have you seen this? These exercises that the Society of Automotive Engineers did. The one I can think of specifically is they went to Tampa, St. Pete, in Florida, had people go in AVs. They've done it in several other areas too. And each time they find 80% of the people are highly skeptical, 20% accept it. They get in the cars, they go for a ride, it completely flips. It's 80% are accepting and only 20% against.
Yeah, and I think it's frustrating a little. I think people have come to see, unfortunately, to see PAVE a little bit as like we're sort of trying to spin like, things as being more pro AV than they really are. And that's really not our mission. Our mission is really educational. And like, it's a little frustrating that if you're involved in this, especially if you're involved in anything involving first-time AV riders, you see what's in the data again and again, that like, doesn't matter how negative someone's perception is, when it's based on something abstract, as soon as it becomes based on something real, it completely resets. It's not tethered to that original point in any way. And so for us, like, it's super intuitive that like, yeah, things are bad, but like, it doesn't mean that AVs are screwed at all. And I think that when we try and get that message out there, people are like, oh, you're just spinning us because you're backed by these companies. And the reality is like, this is what the data says. And if you want all 1,500 pages of it, I'm happy to share it with you.
Yeah, the 48% that won't ride in a taxi or a ride share is shockingly high to me. But like you say, as soon as they try it, or if they ever are willing to try it, that changes.
But they'll never get in it, so they'll never try, Tony. So they're just, it's just not going to happen.
I will also say, I mean, survey work, especially about like technology that is emerging and things like that. It's very hard to do it really well and really scientifically. And there is some noise in this data. And so, for example, you get slightly different results when you describe an autonomous vehicle. You ask people to sort of rate their sentiment about an autonomous vehicle versus a driverless vehicle versus an automated vehicle. There are little variations in those sentiment numbers that like are impossible for me. There's no way to tie that to any kind of causal thing. And so, but again, I think it just emphasizes that people are guessing about a lot of this stuff and just working with what they have, which is almost nothing. And what they do have is mostly fiction, I think.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of correlation to this between AVs and early commercial flights. I think Pan Am started in like 1927, 1928. So many people said, I ain't going up in one of them flying machines. And now we get on them like we're cattle, and we go all over, or did before the whole lockdown thing happened. And that brings me full circle to, you started out by saying, boy, this data's so old, even though it's only a month or two old. Do you think that the quarantining, the COVID crisis would flip people's ideas of going in an autonomous taxi versus having a driver in there?
So there is a really interesting question about all kinds of shared mobility right now, I think, that come out of this COVID-19 crisis. Frankly, it's too early to know for sure what that full impact is going to be, I think. But certainly we've seen much more emphasis on, for example, delivery. And there's a really interesting, and you're going to have to excuse me for a sec while I find it, a really interesting finding that people said, I think it was 51% of people said that they would be more likely to trust AVs if they were used to deliver cargo and not humans first. And actually that compares really favorable for comparison. If you ask people if an autonomous vehicle were limited to 25 miles an hour, would that make you trust it more? Only 25% said agreed. So you see people, there's something about, proving that this technology works with delivery actually does build trust. And obviously delivery is huge right now, and especially delivery that involves no human contact. So I think like there are actually some very legitimate reasons to believe. And then on top of all this, I think one of the challenges that the AV space has is that we've done a lot of talking about the benefits of AVs, and we haven't done a lot of showing. And I think that, again, that's another theme that's just throughout this data. And so having companies like Cruise going out and making food bank deliveries, I think there are over 3,000 deliveries they've made to a food bank in San Francisco. Showing that AVs can do some real good in the world, I think, can only help, because so far it has unfortunately been mostly talk.
Is there any issue? I mean, sometimes people talk about a problem that people have with the nomenclature related to autonomous driving or ADAS, and there's a lot of confusion. I mean, did these numbers bear any of that out, or is it just simply a case of you're saying automated driving and people are saying, we don't know?
Yeah, no, I mean, clearly, like I said, that there were not huge differences when you ask people driverless versus autonomous, but there were some variations, and some of them were quite random. We did also ask people about sort of like an AV where the driver never has any opportunity to drive versus where they do, and having that sort of dual mode, so to speak, where you can drive it when you want to, or you can turn it into full autonomous mode when you don't. That pulled much higher than a full autonomous vehicle. That was actually in positive territory, whereas the autonomous vehicles were generally in negative territory on sentiment. So, but to your point about nomenclature, it's a huge issue. It's something that we're slowly seeing some momentum around. We're starting with ADAS. We have, and by the way, there's a whole interesting angle with that too, where if people are exposed to ADAS, if they have ADAS in their cars, especially the more sophisticated the ADAS system is, so like remote parking, for example, versus parking assist, the more advanced it is, the more accepting they are of AVs, which makes sense. It's that same, getting comfortable with the real thing instead of just the abstract idea of it. But again, you see confusion about ADAS as well. In fact, we're not even entirely sure that everybody who said that they had every feature on their car really has them, because the numbers don't really add up to what little we know about the sales figures. And then a good number of people say they are confused about the names. There's too many names. We know that from other surveys as well. So there is an effort. Consumer Reports, National Safety Council, SAE just signed on to their ADAS nomenclature. I think that's a really good step. The next step is sort of getting into that level 2+, level 3, level 4, sort of where ADAS and full autonomy where that line starts to get blurry. That's where we really need to have good nomenclature. And frankly, we have a lot of work to do on that front, because it's a controversial.
How much education do you see going towards lawmakers and government? Is that something that you're pursuing as well?
Yeah, and you'll have to excuse my cat wandering in here.
That's good.
That's okay. My dog's right here.
It's a sign of the times. So there are some extremely well-informed lawmakers on these issues, but they are unfortunately the exception. And I think there's a lot of progress to be done there. Obviously, we didn't poll them, but sort of policymaker workshops is something that we've done a little bit of in the past, and we're definitely going to do it, because this is really complicated technology, not just in terms of understanding the technology itself, like from safety regulation perspective, but also sort of how like the ripple effects. And actually, one of the really interesting things was when we asked people to rate their own personal preference about how they would use an AV, it's either positive or negative. When you ask people to assess what the sort of broader impacts on society will be from AVs, it's like not sure responses just get dramatically higher. And I think that's the case with it. So lawmakers, we have a lot of work to do on education there, because there's so much to understand, and it has to be really cross-disciplinary too, which makes it even more challenging.
Yeah, Ed, your data also showed that people with physical challenges are more open to AVs. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think they're an obvious constituency, right? It's the same reason that we have groups like National Federation of the Blind and the United Spinal Alliance as members of PAVE, is they see the promise of this technology, right? That this gives people who really are not well served by our mobility system today, an opportunity. It's more than that. As you know, people with those kinds of disabilities or challenges, they want to go mainstream. If they could have their own car, boy, their lives would change. Yeah. So I used to be a caregiver for developmentally disabled people, and I've really seen what a challenge this is, because group homes have to be in an affordable neighborhood, which usually means out in the suburbs, the edge of the suburbs. A bus stop could be a mile away. I had a client with an electric wheelchair, and we didn't have a wheelchair lift, and so we use a quarter of his battery just getting to the bus stop. And these are real challenges, and they're invisible to most people because these people have a hard time getting out into the world. And I think what AVs provide is the opportunity for not just mobility, but really autonomy. In other words, like disabled people being able to go where they want, when they want, and not having to wait on someone else to come pick them up or adapt their schedule to someone else. And it's easy to underappreciate how big that is.
So does the autonomous vehicle basically become something that is truly the definition of a transportation appliance? Would this be the thing that the folks at Car and Driver would be just like outraged by? Yeah, I'm talking to you, Tony.
I mean, I think, yeah, Tony would be I'll say this. I think the most important thing that one of the biggest misperceptions of AVs is that they are sort of one thing or even just a couple of things. Really, this is a core technology that's going to enable a really massive diversity of different things. And I think even if you look among our member companies, you have a vehicle like the Cruise Origin, which is this boxy, very much a mobility appliance. I think I compared it to the McDonald's of mobility when I wrote about it. And then you have, like the Waymo Jaguar I-Pace, which is this premium vehicle and sleek and pure electric, and it's got a very different kind of a thing. And then you have something like the Nuro R2, which is like it's a car, but it's occupantless. And it's only for delivering, they're piloting with grocery delivery with Quiroga. And you have buses, you have shuttles, you have, jitney, taxi. The form factors that AVs are going to take are going to not just be every one that you see or a lot of the ones that you see with cars today, but it's going to give birth to whole new ones. And so I think the key to some of this is to not get too locked into AVs are going to be this thing, because I think they can be all kinds of things. But I'm curious about Tony's perspective too.
Yeah, well, Tony, you want to drive.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I've it is nice to drive, on a great road where you're all alone. But, if you're stuck in traffic, I live in Los Angeles, if you're stuck in traffic, it's a pretty miserable experience. It's not something you want to do. And suddenly the manual transmission is less interesting, great steering, all of that sort of goes out the window because you're just crawling along at 5 miles an hour. And if I could sit in the back seat and crawl around and, be comfortable, I would kind of pick that. So, I'm willing to give it up on some ends and then not willing to give it up on other ends. So.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone's talking seriously about banning human driving. Funnily enough, there was a moment where a couple of people wrote, it's time to think about banning human driving pieces. And I think it was 2015 or 2016. And to me, this illustrates, and I actually wrote a Medium post on PAVE's Medium page about this, where I wrote in a Waymo in 2016, right after people were writing this, it's time to think about banning driving. And it was impressive, right? It's an amazing technology, but it was still very unintuitive, didn't feel human, very conservative, definitely felt not ready for prime time. But the anticipation was the public perception was this is right around the corner. And I did another ride in 2018, and then again this fall I did a fully driverless ride, and night and day difference. The technology is going like this, but the perceptions are going like this. And that to me is really illustrates what's going on here, is that the perceptions are not in any way tethered to what's actually happening. And in fact, if they were, we'd be getting more optimistic about AVs and not less.
Yeah, look, this is where automakers and suppliers have got to step up. They've got to put butts in seats. One of the things, unfortunately, the Detroit Auto Show was canceled. They were going to be shuttling media and other people coming into town from Detroit Metro Airport to the show in autonomous vehicles. We need to see a lot more of that.
Yeah, and stuff like May Mobility in downtown Detroit and elsewhere. They're pursuing where are the first places we can go? We don't need to solve all the problems. Let's find a domain where we can make this technology work. And I think that's really valuable in terms of getting people comfortable with the technology.
Hey, you guys
I'm sorry, go ahead, Gary.
Somebody just drank because we spoke over each other. So Ed, you guys looked at the the Uber crash in Arizona. What about the more famous Tesla crash in Florida? What effect has that had, do you think, on autonomous driving?
Also very little. Hang on a sec. Let me see if I can pull the exact number up here. So again, about half of people know nothing at all about it. And there's actually been multiple. We actually asked about multiple autopilot related crashes. pretty similar to the Uber. It doesn't seem to be having a real effect. I do think it is interesting though that 19% of Americans said they believe that you can buy a fully driverless, and that was the exact wording of the question, fully driverless car today. And that's really troubling. And it kind of gets to, and I want to be clear, like all of this is my personal view. Like PAVE doesn't speak with one voice. We're too big and diverse a group to do that. But like, I definitely, one of the real frustrations I have with Tesla is that they are really positioned as a leader, and a lot of people look to them as a leader in this space. And unfortunately, I feel like they do contribute in a number of ways to some of the misunderstandings, particularly, as I said before, where driver assistance and autonomy that line starts to become blurry, and things like how you describe it and the words you use to name it and talk about it and demonstrate it, how you demonstrate it, and a whole bunch of other things start to play into that and create potentially unsafe things. And if you paid attention to the NTSB investigations of multiple now Tesla Autopilot crashes, I think it's pretty clear that there is a problem there.
So you said about 20% believe it exists now. Is that right?
You can buy
80.
Yeah.
So the 80% that have you polled when they think it's coming, or when is it just around the corner for them, or what do they think? When do they think it's going to happen?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'm like, I've got like so much.
Are you sifting through the 1,500 pages?
Not the 1,500, but even when you boil it down, it's still like 50 pages. And
I'm sure.
We did. People generally think that about 10 years out is sort of where the kind of people tend to cluster in terms of when they expect autonomous vehicles. But I think one of the issues too is that cars are so ubiquitous, and when you ask someone when are autonomous vehicles going to be here, first of all, there's a question of what do you mean by autonomous vehicle, right? Because that could mean a lot of different things. Is it trucking? Is it delivery? Is it right? There's a lot of different places where it's easier and harder, but also it's just where it's here. And I think a lot of people think that AVs are going to be like cars, where it's just the technology is going to be solved, as Silicon Valley people love to say, and then it's just going to be everywhere. And I think if you really understand the technology, that it's going to be, in some places before others. The future will not be evenly distributed, and it will take time for that to scale out. And especially if you live in certain areas, it could be a very long time before there are autonomous vehicles in your neighborhood.
Yeah. Hey, look, we got to take a quick commercial break here. Hold on for about 30 seconds or so. I know Gary's got a bunch of other topics he wants to get us into. Gary, is there a number?
No, there's not. Sorry.
No number. Okay. No Dr. Data today, but plenty of other things to talk about. We'll be back in just a moment. All right, we're back with Tony Quiroga, Ed Niedermeyer, and of course, Gary Vasilash. So, Gary, what do you got on the list of things we got to get into here?
All right, so before we get to the entire list here, I want to ask Ed. Okay, so take your PAVE hat off. Okay, now you're just Ed. Okay, so we'll stipulate that.
Yep.
Okay, so here's my question to you: Is Tesla doing good for the autonomous driving community, or making it a bit problematic? Just as your opinion.
Yeah. Well, I think, there is, as all things with Tesla, it's easy to want to make it black and white, but it's not. There's a shade of gray there. I think, certainly Elon Musk is very good, and Tesla are very good at getting people excited about new technology of any kind, getting people excited about the future, getting people thinking about what the benefits of this technology could be. On the other hand, I think there have been a number of things that have been like problematic, right? And I think if you look at Elon Musk in particular, his predictions, I mean, his record is abysmal for predicting when Tesla, the company he runs, is going to be able to accomplish different autonomous things. And I think, clearly one of the problems that we're dealing with perception-wise is that, there was too much hype. And there's a hype hangover now, right? And so I think Elon has definitely contributed to that. I think that the autopilot issue is really troubling too, because as NTSB investigations have shown, having that high of a level of automation, and this is also backed up by lots and lots of academic research into human automation interaction. When you get that high level of automation, but it's not fully autonomous, and the human driver has to stay monitoring it, it's basically impossible for a human to really maintain that level of oversight. We may be bad drivers, and the statistics certainly bear that out, the number of road deaths that we have, but we're even worse at babysitting automation. And I think that's what you have. And so I think, calling it autopilot, every time he demonstrates it, he takes his hands off and he'll look away and talk to people. And I think just, it's clear, he wants to monetize the excitement around autonomous driving. And that's fine, I guess, if people want to buy into that and people have faith, but I question whether he's going to be able to deliver real full self-driving. And in the meantime, I think he's really muddied the water about what autopilot is. Even when they first launched autopilot, they called it a convenience feature, the adaptive cruise control and the lane keeping assist. They called it on their website convenience features. And then when people started getting into these crashes, then they started saying it's a safety feature. And so it's like, this is he's putting his interest first. I think if you look at some of the other things that he's done, that's kind of what he does. People are like, is he conservative now? Was he a socialist before? What's going on? Like, Elon does what he thinks is going to be good for Elon, and I understand what he's doing. I do unfortunately think that public understanding of this technology, and particularly the difference between ADAS and autonomy, has suffered as a result, and that's really unfortunate because he is so influential, and I think he has some responsibility there.
So let me throw this one to John and Tony. So earlier this week, we heard that Cadillac will be coming out with something called Ultra Cruise, staying with this theme of autonomous. And so basically, it sounds to me as though Super Cruise is what you do on the divided highway, and Ultra Cruise is what you'll be able to do driving in cities and driving through neighborhoods. So, John, then Tony, what do you think of the likelihood of this occurring anytime soon, meaning within a couple of years?
I'd say very, very good. But it'll come in stages. They're not going to just say, hey, here it is, Ultra Cruise, you can drive anywhere. It'll come in stages.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I think it'd probably happen in the next couple of years. I mean, I think that's the expectation, especially when they make such an announcement, is that it'll come in the next 1 or 2 model years.
So will Cadillac then be, or General Motors in general, will they be better positioned in terms of, let's call it, highly assisted driving technology than other OEMs? I mean, and across the board then. So we'd be looking at, whether it's Mercedes or Volkswagen or Ford or FCA. Throwing that out there to all of you.
Tony,
well, they're the ones that had a press release. So, but presumably everybody else is working on the exact same thing, I would think.
Yeah, they are. Look, there's a first mover advantage. So if GM can get out there and, once production starts up, what are they going to have this in a bunch of models? Every single brand within 2 years, a bunch of models are going to have it. If GM can cement in the public's mind that it is the one that brought that out, even if others start to try to catch up, it's going to be a huge marketing advantage, a great perception on the part of the public with GM if they're able to do that.
Yeah, I wonder how forgiving the public will be if a GM accident occurs using this system versus Tesla using this system. Because it seems like, not that many people, half the population, I guess, according to your statistics, Ed, know about the Tesla crashes. And then, how does that play with public perception, I wonder, GM versus Tesla, if they were to have an accident?
Yeah, certainly, I think every automaker would like to have Tesla's ability to kind of, their sort of Teflon coating and their reliable band of defenders who will defend them even when, for example, the NTSB says there's kind of something fundamentally wrong with the safety of the human automation interaction in your system. But look, I think Cadillac Super Cruise, which is the predecessor to this, which is going into all of their cars, even going into Hondas, I guess. I think that, from my perspective, gave me a lot of confidence in GM because they did the things that NTSB, before NTSB investigated Tesla, they did the things that NTSB eventually said Tesla should have done, which is create operational design domain limits, which means just limiting what roads you can use them on, so that the domain that your vehicle is operating in automated mode is appropriate to the level of technology in the car. And then also having a driver monitoring system. That's a huge piece of it because, as I said before, it's basically impossible for humans to, on a sustained basis, babysit this kind of technology. And so I think that's the caveat, as John was saying, right? Like this ultra cruise on city streets, it's going to come, but it will probably be gradual, in part because they have to kind of go through and if make sure that where they're going to release these features, that those are actually safe and appropriate for the level of technology in that car, which is going to have to be short of like what Waymo is using, for example, because none of us can afford what Waymo's got under the hood right now.
Will we ever be able to afford what Waymo has under the hood?
So John Kravchuk told me, that CEO of Waymo, that they are looking at actually a private ownership model, but it's not the traditional one. It's actually a lease, a short-term lease. The idea would be essentially you would get to lease it for, I don't know, I think about a year or so. I don't want to, get too specific because I don't recall, and I don't think they were committing to anything that specific. But then it would go into a fleet. And he said the issue is not just the upfront cost. That is part of it. But it's actually servicing things like LiDAR, and maintaining a system of the complexity of an autonomous vehicle is incredibly hard. And so true private ownership, I think, is going to be way beyond what most people are going to want to do. But
Ed, isn't Lucid's business model sort of a NetJet kind of a thing? You get an autonomous electric car, but you share ownership for the very reasons you're citing because of the cost.
Yeah, and Canoe is another company out of LA that is really looking at sort of a post-ownership model as well. I'm not as familiar with Lucid and Canoe on the technology side, and I know actually Canoe, they're launching the vehicle without autonomous capabilities, and again, through over-the-air updates, they want to be able to push it to the vehicle. So I can't sit here and tell you like those will be private, like fully autonomous vehicles that you'll own. I think they aspire to that, but I don't know when that's going to happen.
So let me throw this thing out there. So earlier this week, Polestar, which is basically the offshoot from Volvo of upscale sporty electric vehicles, announced that they will have Polestar places. And they'll have a couple of the San Francisco area. They'll have one for Tony in LA. They'll have one in New York City. And basically this model is sort of like the Tesla stores or salons or whatever the hell they call them, where you don't go there and buy the vehicle. You go there and just simply look at the vehicle, and then things happen behind the scenes. Okay, so take the Polestar thing, and as we were saying earlier in the show about how the world has changed so much within the last few weeks, and we're seeing more and more ads of companies saying, don't worry, you can buy the car online and we'll bring it to your house. And so I begin to wonder, is this going to have an effect on ownership for people and dealerships right across the board? I mean, is this going to be a complete transformation of what the expectations were in February? Anybody?
Boy. I mean, right, the unemployment numbers look like they might have an impact on car dealerships as well, too, right? When the auto industry sneezes, the suppliers and the car dealers are the ones who catch the cold, right? First, they're kind of the canaries in the coal mine. So I have to imagine it's an uncertain time to be either a supplier or a dealer, or an OEM for that matter, right? So there are definitely economic concerns, but I don't know. I mean, I think franchise law in this country anyway has dealers fairly well lodged in there. And actually Polestar, those Polestar places, or at least their stores, and this might be outdated information, but I was told when I was briefed on this by Polestar that they would actually be franchise dealerships, but they would just resemble a company store.
Well, I thought the
It's sort of a
dealerships,
hybrid.
the dealerships would actually be the ones that are responsible for the delivery and the paperwork and all that sort of thing.
Right.
So
But
it's sort of a different model.
Yeah, kind of a hybrid.
It's kind of a high. Look, it's very difficult for any In fact, it's impossible for any automaker that has already established franchise dealership outlets to try to do an end run around them. The reason Tesla's been able to get away with it is it never had a franchise agreement to begin with. And even at that, they've had problems trying to establish in states. But yeah, for Volvo, even under a new brand name, Polestar, I assure you there would be multiple lawsuits from dealerships going after them if they tried to do an end run around the franchise system.
But if you were a Lucid or another company that is up and coming,
that's different.
Okay, but so what do you think the future will be? I mean, will it be the normal dealership model, or will we get to the point where people are going to say, you know what, I buy everything on my computer, and I don't need to go in there. It worked during the crisis when I was able to order online and they brought my link into my house. I want them to bring, my Lucid Air to my house.
Tony?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it comes down to, convenience is definitely huge, but it also comes down to how much the consumer wants to see the product in person. And that's sort of what the dealer offers. That's sort of what the company store offers that you just can't do online. And it's such an expensive purchase that you would think that people want to lay hands on it before they buy it. They want, for me, I think it's great because I write car reviews. So, suddenly my importance goes up, I guess. Maybe, I don't know, Amazon reviews might be competing with me. But I think people, when they're spending that much money, want to lay hands on something. And it's something they're going to live with for, 3 years to 10 years or something. So I don't know. I don't see the store going away, but maybe the convenience of the deal might be fixed. And so you don't have to go in and fight with the salesman and do the whole manager salesman game. Maybe you just do it all over your computer, that part. But I don't know. I think there's still a function for having cars on the ground and seeing it in person.
Years ago, Lexus did a survey of its owners to find out what was the thing they liked the least about Lexus. And overwhelmingly, it was the time it took to buy a new car, to buy a new Lexus. They hated, they didn't hate the dealers per se. They didn't hate the dealership. They hated how much time they had to spend there. I bought a new car 2 years ago. I can tell you it's still the same. If you go in with no preparation whatsoever in finance or insurance, you can spend 4 hours in a dealership. It kills your excitement to get a new car. So I think we're going to see a migration. We're already seeing it. Dealers, in fact, AutoNation, Penske, and the like, trying to push more of the paperwork getting done at home online, so that when you come in to take delivery, the salesperson or whoever it is takes you through the car, shows you features and all that. Maybe you've already done a test drive. Maybe you go for a test drive. But there's an excitement of going to the dealership to buy this brand new shiny car and drive it home. That you still want to capture. The rest of it, get rid of it.
Right.
Yeah, like a lot of Tesla stuff, like they have definitely pushed, the industry to improve in a lot of ways that John was just talking about. But I don't think that necessarily means that exactly what Tesla has done is exactly what's going to take over either. And I think what's really interesting is in some ways they've kind of missed an opportunity in the sense that like Tesla is not at this point anyway famous for its service, and in some ways they really benefited from people's dislike of dealerships and the long tradition we have in this country of disliking dealerships and car dealers. But at the same time, I think there are some Tesla owners who've kind of realized after owning a car for a few years that if you have a good dealer in your area, if you have a good level of trust and a good relationship with them, in some cases that is better than a company that is constantly tight on cash, very ambitious, trying to do a million things at once. Constantly reinventing the wheel. And so I think, again, that hybrid model that Polestar is doing, where they kind of try and get the best of both worlds, especially with the legal environment, like it seems promising.
Sticking with this issue of buying things, and Ed, you touched on this earlier. What do you guys think the likelihood will be that we're going to have a robust recovery? We've had the factory started opening this week. That's going so-so. I think that we're going to, the cars are going to be coming out of the factories more slowly than perhaps had been anticipated. But, again, with, an unemployment report came out today, and what we're up to nearly 39 million people out of work. There is this pent-up demand that we hear about, but I mean, how long is the pent-up demand going to last, and what's this year going to look like in terms of car
Well, if you look at China,
good.
who is a little bit ahead of us in the COVID pandemic sort of thing, sales have bounced back pretty dramatically there. It looks like public transit is sort of the big loser. But even bike share and stuff has bounced back, but car sales in particular, and ride hailing even, because the ride hailing companies have taken some steps with that. And so I think there's definitely a chance that car sales come back fairly healthily. The question for me, because I think that, the COVID thing has created pent-up demand. The question is the underlying economic situation and that unemployment, and, are these jobs going to come back? Are they going to be as good when they come back? That's going to be the real scary part.
I'm also wondering how many people are going to continue working at home until, a vaccine or something like that comes out. And if you're a 2 or 3 car family and suddenly, let's say your lease is up, are you going to replace that car necessarily? Is that something you want to replace? Because now you're working at home, you can get away with 1 car or 2 cars instead of 3 cars, or, 1 or 2 cars. And so that sort of part of the market is like, maybe they're not going to be so quick to pull the trigger. Even if they're employed, even if they were normally ready to buy, maybe they're not going to pull the trigger on it because they're like, I don't need to go anywhere.
Yeah, and also, Ed, I just saw some other analysis on the Chinese sales, and you're right, they're up year over year. That's comparing to a low period a year ago, too. But what these analysts were saying is, let's see how long this lasts. There was massive incentives, not only on the part of the automakers, also on the part of the dealers, also on the part of provinces, also on the part of cities, also on the part of the national government. And they said that's just not sustainable. And so they're cautioning, look, it's great to see that sales bump, but let's see if it lasts.
Right. Yeah. And I think it comes back to, and particularly, so here in Portland, we're a very service economy, pretty much for our restaurants and our brew pubs and things like that. And those businesses are gonna have a tough time for a while, and a lot of them won't make it. And will the investment be there to start new businesses in their place? Maybe we had a glut of brew pubs too, and some of them just won't come back. There's a lot of questions about the broader economic situation.
So what about the affordability issue? So Tony, you drive new cars all the time, and I'm sure that over the years you've seen a steady increase in that number on the Monronis. Are cars and trucks and SUVs just getting to the point where they're crazy expensive, and that is going to have an impact going forward on the market?
Well, right. Yeah. I mean, I think the average new car price is coming close to $38,000, which is really a lot of money. And, wages haven't gone in, the same direction as quickly. So, potentially. Yeah. But I don't know. I mean, cars are expensive for sure. And if we're going into an economic downturn, it doesn't bode well for those expensive cars.
It's interesting. You're right. It's about $38,000 for the average MSRP. The average per capita income in the U.S. right now is about $64,000. So that tells me historically we're at the same rate. Historically, it's always taken somewhere between 24 and 26 weeks of income to buy a new car. So we would seemingly be at that level. The difference is now we're paying for internet. Now we're paying for cable. Now we're paying for cell phones. We have all these other expenses that didn't exist historically. And so even though I think the same number of weeks of income have got to be devoted to buying a new car, there's all this other stuff eating at income that just makes the car price just seem that much more.
It seems a little telling to me, and you guys are paying more attention to this than I am, but like the fact that a company like Ford is coming out with a pickup truck that's below the Ranger, that's smaller than the Ranger, to me that seems like a little bit of a hint that they might undertake, and this is a company, right? They're basically the biggest luxury or premium priced vehicle seller in the country, right? They sell crazy amounts of F-Series priced at quite rich prices. It might be a sign that even they know, like, yeah, people want trucks and stuff, but we got to like get some more affordable options out there for folks.
But could part of that be that they gave up with the small cars? That would be an affordable way for somebody to get into their showroom. So you got to have something to put in there.
Right. No, that's exactly why they're doing that truck. Affordability.
And they'll have no competition at that end of the market too. I mean, there's nobody that builds something smaller than a Ranger, a Tacoma, Colorado. So they'll have that all to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Ed, I've got a question for you. Earlier this week on Autoline Daily, or maybe it was last week. Anyway, I said I was talking about battery swapping because that's being talked about again. And I said, oh, yeah, Tesla had this battery swapping thing, but it really never happened. I was under the impression that, Elon did his smoke and mirrors video presentation out in California. But I had one of our viewers, Francis Martin, wrote in and said, oh, no. Every X and S was fully capable of battery swapping. And Katie, I don't know if you got the pictures or Carmen, but he actually sent pictures of the Harris Ranch. But I'm asking you because I remember you camping out at the Harris Ranch to see if anything was going on there.
Yeah, I mean, so the battery swap, that's what led to this book. I kind of had gotten fascinated with batteries, so we did a whole show about it. Yeah. So the deal was, and first of all, I'm a little rusty on the topic. It's been a minute since I've.
Sorry about that. But...
No, and it's like the detail and minutia gets really dense because it's all tied to this regulation in California, right? The ZEV credit, and basically the deal was, yes. Every Model S and X were, in theory, capable of battery swap. However, the first time you did it, it took a very long time because they basically had to cut out some like insulators and various other things. I'm not privy to the precise details of what that was, but it was my understanding was a multi-hour process the first time you do it.
So you couldn't just buy an X or an S, drive out to Harris Ranch and swap batteries?
Absolutely not, no. And by the way, too, I mean, the issue, they weren't making that available to their owners. They were saying it was available to owners, and they're sending invitations to people who did that drive between LA and San Francisco a lot. And I spoke to people when I was out there. It was not open at all. There were lines at the superchargers. People were saying I would pay, any price basically at this point to be able to swap and go. And this was like almost 6 months after they said they opened it to the public. And people who did that drive, they said on a regular basis, on a weekly basis, had not been invited to actually use it. So that first time, the amount of time it took, I think there was a question with the way the ZEV credit, extra credits that Tesla was getting, whether or not that was in full compliance. Once they did it the first time, they could do it in enough time that they were in compliance with those extra credits. But the first time it wasn't. So like with all things with Tesla, it's
Did any customer Teslas actually have a battery swap successfully done on them?
I have not spoken to someone who got their battery swapped. I have seen pictures online of people doing it. I'm not always sure when someone is or is not a Tesla employee online, if you know what I mean. Let's just say I do know that Tesla employees do not always disclose that they're Tesla employees when they talk about the company online. I definitely can say that as a statement of fact. So again, it wouldn't surprise me if there were a couple, if it happened for a few customers, but it was not being sort of openly offered.
Yeah, didn't the CARB have to look into this because they were giving Tesla extra ZEV credits, and I thought they pulled the credits before Tesla, pulled the swaps, or how did that work, or don't you remember?
No, I went to them and I said, hey guys, I finally pieced it together that why this was happening, and essentially they didn't have to make it available to all their customers. The regulations were written very poorly in that they really had to demonstrate it once, and then every vehicle in the fleet was getting almost double the credits as a result. And when I went and I talked to CARB, I talked to CARB staff and I talked to CARB board members, and the staff told me, yeah, we've been warning the board that we're getting taken advantage of here. Like we left this loophole in the rules. So again, like I definitely, people like to misrepresent what I've said about this stuff, and I did not say they were breaking the law. They were fully within compliance with the rules. What was weird about that situation was that the staff knew it. They're the ones who do the nuts and bolts of the writing the regulation. Their supervisors on the board, though, when they brought it to them, were like, meh, whatever. And there was a sundown built into the law anyway, and they're like, we'll just let this sundown in a couple years. And that was probably worth, I mean, it was easily worth tens of millions of dollars to Tesla. We don't know exactly what prices they were getting for those credits, but tens of millions of dollars, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. But again, also not the first time that a local government has surreptitiously helped out a local automaker.
Yeah.
Ed, do you have any intel on the forthcoming battery day that Tesla's supposed to be having?
No, not any more than anybody who read that Reuters piece or No, it's tough to say because I don't know what they're going to say. I don't know the exact details. Clearly, my big takeaway from what I know so far is that that Panasonic relationship is not in good shape. Has not been in good shape for a while, and clearly Tesla sees an opportunity to go with CATL. It's just going to be interesting to see how they kind of manage both of those relationships, or if the Gigafactory in Nevada, eventually CATL comes in and replaces Panasonic there. I definitely, if I were at CATL, I would probably want to have some, meet some of the Panasonic execs for some sushi and beer somewhere quiet in Tokyo and get the download from them about what's really gone on in that relationship, because it seems to have been rocky.
So any of you guys, why is the million-mile battery now seemingly the holy grail? I mean, it seems that we've gone from looking for, $100 per kilowatt hour to a million-mile battery. Anybody have any sense of why that is?
The only way that a million-mile battery makes sense to me is if you're going to have some sort of ride-hailing operation. And so you don't want to buy a car as a fleet manager that's only going to last 100, 200,000 miles. You want something that's going to last 1 million miles. And not just for the batteries, by the way. You're going to want the entire vehicle to last that long, because now you can amortize the cost over 1 million miles, which is exactly what Class 7 and Class 8 trucks do. So to me, that's the only logic in putting so much time and effort into making a battery last 1 million miles.
Yeah, and with autonomous vehicles, a lot of AV companies really want. You have to have at least a hybrid, so you have the high voltage line to supply your, your compute and your sensors and everything. But a lot of companies want, like Cruise, for example, really want to have all their AVs be electric, and because AVs are expensive, but you can also operate them nonstop. The key to making the economics work at all is just utilization, is making sure those are out working. Earning a buck every second of every day that you possibly can, and as you say, also that you can amortize that huge upfront expense over a long period. So frankly, I think it makes sense for those high utilization fleet situations, which also, by the way, John, might be somewhere where battery swap becomes relevant again, because you have a limited fleet. You can plan around it. You can limit your stock. You can be smart about it, and reduce that that downtime from charging as much as you can, so that they really are, it's a couple minutes in and out to swap that battery, and they're back out there earning money again, which they need to be doing to make this work.
Yeah, battery swap. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say a lot of the London taxi fleet is switching over to electric, and I wonder what sort of data they have and what's come out of that. I imagine that that's somewhat government incentivized. For some cost, because the million-mile battery doesn't exist yet. But I wonder what they're seeing and what kind of swaps and what kind of mileage they have.
Yeah, that's a great point, Tony, because I dug this info up online a couple of years ago before they went out with the new taxi. 40% of the London cabs were 15 years old or older. So again, this is why you want to build vehicles, including the battery, that last a long time. But going back to the swapping, the issue is to get everybody to commonize the size, the attachment points, the connectors. You want it to be the Prindle throughout the whole industry. And everyone says, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's adopt my battery size and connectors and all that. So until the industry comes to some agreement that everything's going to be the same, battery swapping, in my view, is just not going to catch on.
Yeah, outside of those fleet applications. Tony, I'm really glad you brought up that London cab. I got a chance to tour the London Electric Vehicle Company factory and drive one of those things. That electric London cab is one of the coolest vehicles, I think, in the world right now, for a bunch of different reasons. It's like, it's it's an aluminum space frame that's like made by ex-Lotus guys, basically by hand. Like it's like they build it like they build the sports car. You know, they used to build the sports cars, I guess. It's actually an extended range hybrid that uses two Volvo XC90 plug-in hybrid battery packs. It reuses a ton of Volvo parts bin stuff. It's got it, but also it's completely disabled accessible, which is like amazing. And like once you see that, like every vehicle, it doesn't matter what every single one has a ramp. It's got Braille instructions on everything, and it's all just built in, baked in every single one. As soon as you see that, it's so that like every taxi can't accommodate people with
right.
It's like it feels like we're being left behind there. So.
Yeah, that was designed in the Geely Design Studio in Barcelona, and I had the opportunity of Peter Horbury taking me through that vehicle and pointing out all of the things that they did for that. And so this is just one of the cases where if somebody is really paying attention to all of the details, you end up having even though it's just a cabin, as you say, Ed, it was just like really magnificent execution.
Fun to drive too. I mean, it's electric, so it's peppy. And one of the really cool things, it's extended range electric. And one of the things, I don't think they've implemented it yet, but what they want to do is have a geofence. So basically, when you're outside of London, you can operate with the gas engine running so that you're not burning down the battery. And then as soon as you hit the city limits where they have the pollution charges, all of a sudden it will automatically force it into EV mode, so you don't pay the congestion charge because EVs are exempt from that. That's like a really cool, innovative thing. And again, from hacked together, Volvo XC90 plug-in parts. It's not like some brand new from scratch drivetrain. Like Geely has got some, they're kind of impressive on some of these things.
Yeah. Hey, look, guys, we're at the top of the hour here, maybe a little bit beyond. We're going to have to wrap it up, but Ed, thanks so much for coming on the show. Great having you back on again.
Thank you. This has been a ton of fun. Every time it's always a blast. So
and as you guys come up with more data from PAVE, let us know, and we'll need you back on to get updates.
Absolutely, really appreciate that.
And Tony, you too. We're going to have to get you back on now. Now that we're going to this format, we don't really rely on people physically being in the studio.
Right. This is terrific, John.
Yeah, we can reach out to you more often, man. So
I appreciate
we'll have to do that.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you bet. And Gary, you and I will just keep on doing it.
Okay, John.
Okay, thanks everybody for having tuned in.
Thank you.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires. Your journey, our passion.
Visit our website, Autoline.tv, where you can watch us live Thursday afternoons. Get your daily fix with Autoline Daily and in-depth analysis and interviews with Autoline This Week. There's all that and much more at Autoline.tv.